Well, g'day and welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the differences between full frame, APS-C and micro four thirds. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? Which one's the right one for you? The reason for making this video is I recently purchased the OM-1 Olympus camera, which is a micro four thirds sensor. If I'm being honest, I've struggled a little bit to get the images that I'm after. And I want to explain to you why that is, because there are some fundamental differences that you might not be aware of. So the main difference is just the physical sensor size, which is different. A full frame camera, which we have here, which is the R5, that has a physical dimension of 36 by 24 millimeters. Now, if we move to an APS-C body that's not Canon, it's 23.5 by 15.6. And finally, micro four thirds, it actually has a physical dimension of 17.3 by 13 millimeters. So as you can see, they progressively get smaller and smaller as we go down. All right, it's going to be much easier if I just give us a real world example of how this works. Let's say we're in the field and there's a golden headed cisticola in the grass and we want to take a photo. I've got a 400mm lens, and as I point the lens at the bird, obviously the image coming down the lens is going to be circular because this is the circle. It's called our image circle. So that's the image coming down the lens. Now we need to capture that image, and how we do that is obviously on the sensor. Now the size of the image that we capture depends on the size of the sensor. So if I overlay the full frame sensor on our image circle, that's what's going to be captured by this full frame body. Now the view that we get through the viewfinder is 400 millimeters. There's a crop factor of 1, as in where there is no crop factor when we're using a full frame body. So what we see through the viewfinder equals the focal length. And just for ease of explanation in this scenario, I'm going to say that that full frame image is 80 megapixels. All right, so now we've switched to the APS-C body, and just for ease of explanation, we're going to say that this is not a Canon body. It's giving us a 1.5 crop factor. So when we overlay this smaller sensor on our image circle, you can see how much smaller it is, and we're effectively cropping out a lot more, including a lot of that full frame sensor. In fact, it's 1.5 times smaller. And if we work out the megapixels, what we do is we divide the horizontal pixels and the vertical pixels and then multiply those, and it would give us a megapixel of about 35 megapixels. Remember, this one we're saying was 80. This one would be 35, or around 44% of the area of the full frame. So we're actually losing quite a bit of data when we go down to a 1.5 crop factor. Now that also has an impact on the field of view that we get in the viewfinder. They're going to look different. This one here has a 400mm field of view on full frame. As soon as we put it onto APS-C, we need to multiply the focal length by 1.5, so that gives us a 600mm field of view. So when I look through the viewfinder, it's effectively the same as a 600mm on the full frame. Ultimately, we're just cropping out more of the image from that image circle in the body as opposed to doing it in post on the full frame camera. All right, and finally we move on to the micro four thirds. This here is a 400mm lens. It's exactly the same focal length as this one here. However, now we're on this micro four thirds sensor, and remember, this sensor is smaller again. So if we overlay the micro four thirds sensor on our image circle, you can see it's smaller than the APS-C and it's a lot smaller than the full frame. You'll also notice the shape has changed. These two have more of a 3x2 rectangular sensor, whereas this one is 4x3, hence the name micro four thirds. Now, in regards to how much smaller than the full frame, believe it or not, it's only capturing 25% of the area that the full frame is. And remember, 80 megapixels, we went down to 35 megapixels. This one has a 2 times crop and gives us a 20 megapixel image. So 20, 35, 80. So you can see as we crop, we get a much smaller image. Now, of course, because we're doing a 2 times crop, our field of view is going to change again. It's going to be 2 times the focal length. So this focal length is 400 millimeters. We times it by 2. So the field of view in the viewfinder is going to be the equivalent of an 800mm lens on a full frame. And you can see as we go through the images of the cisticola, first we've got our full frame image, then we've got our APS-C image, and then finally we've got our micro four thirds image. And as the sensor gets smaller, our crop gets bigger, the subject gets larger. And it's this crop factor that makes these cameras so attractive to wildlife photographers, because it just makes our subject much, much bigger. I've got a great example of where the APS-C body had a huge advantage. And I went to photograph some rainbow bee eaters, and these are beautiful birds, and I had the R6 Mark II, which is a 24 megapixel full frame camera. And I was actually using the 800mm f11. So I had this lens on the R6, so I had an 800mm field of view. Now I spotted two birds on a branch, but they were over a creek and they were a fair distance away. And here's the shot that was taken with the R6 Mark II at 800mm field of view. Now I wanted to get the birds a bit bigger, and now of course I could crop the R6 Mark II image, but if I did that, I would end up with an 11 megapixel image. So it just so happened I had my R7 with me. So I've attached the 800mm lens to my R7. The R7 is a 32.5 megapixel APS-C sensor. On Canon, we times the crop factor by 1.6 just to be different. So 800 times 1.6 gave us a field of view of 1280 millimeters, which is just huge. And now I took a shot of the two bee eaters, and you can see it's just much, much bigger because our field of view is bigger. We're effectively cropping in. And when we look at them side by side, we've got the R6 Mark II and we've got the R7. The birds are just bigger. Now the major difference is when I zoom in. Remember, we've got a 32.5 versus effectively 11 on the R6. And when we zoom in, the R7 subjects are just far, far bigger. And that gives us a huge advantage. If the subjects are really small and you want to make them much bigger, then these crop bodies have that massive advantage. So the other major advantage that crop bodies give us is the magnification for macro and up close photography. So for example, this OM-1 and 100-400, as mentioned, 800mm field of view. It has a minimum focus distance of 1.3 meters or 4.26 feet. And it gives us a magnification of, I think, 0.57, which is pretty impressive. Now on my morning walks, I actually spot quite a few spiders. We get lots of spiders in Australia, and I've simply just focused up quite close to this garden orb spider. I like how the light was hitting the web and it was making it glow. The detail's great, and it just enabled us to capture this nice close image. And here's another image of a honeybee on a pink callistemon. My in-laws have the most beautiful native garden. I just like the colors in this. And these are the sort of shots you can get from these crop bodies where they just make the subject much, much bigger. Now, another advantage to these crop bodies is the size of the lenses for the equivalent field of view. What do I mean by that? Well, this body here, this kit is probably just under 2 kilos. I'll put it on the screen, but effectively we're getting 200 to 800 6.3 field of view. If we wanted that sort of field of view in a full frame, the lens is going to be enormous. To get a 200 to 800 6.3 is just be massive. For example, the Sony 200 to 600 6.3 is this size here. And this is 600mm field of view. This here is 800 field of view. So you can see that there's a massive advantage in regards to the sizes of the lenses that we can buy and just carry around with us. And I know a lot of people love, especially the Olympus, for that reason, is just the size and the weight. And that was a major thing for me when I started. I chose to start with APS-C, with Canon, and I was shooting with a 40D and then a 7D, but my 40D on this 405.6 gave me that field of view of 640mm, and I captured loads of shots and lots of bird and flight shots. It was 640 was almost perfect. I got this white-necked heron just flying by. The detail is fantastic, and I was very happy with the results from a kit with this lens. A really good counter argument is, well, we can just crop full frame, and yes, you can. However, the cameras are going to be way more expensive for similar specs. If you're not aware, this OM-1 has a stacked 20 megapixel sensor. It's almost as fast as the A1 and the Z9. It offers 50 frames per second. It's got some of the best tracking that you're going to find out there. In fact, I captured this banking welcome swallow with this camera and the 300 f4 Pro, and I absolutely loved this shot, and I was so surprised at how well this camera performed. No rolling shutter, it tracked that small bird, and we got this photo. Now the amazing thing is this body retails, I think, in the US for $2,200, whereas the Z9 and maybe the A1 are up towards, I think, $5,500, $6,000 US dollars, something like that. So there's a big difference. This is pretty a third of the price of those cameras. And the only difference really is the size of the sensor. This one being micro four thirds and those being full frame. So now it sounds like crop bodies are too good to be true. And I've mentioned a number of advantages, and I'm sure there's many more. However, there are a few trade-offs when it comes to crop bodies versus full frame. And there's one that I grossly underestimated, and that's the impact that crop has on your depth of field. So your depth of field, remember, is how much in front and behind your subject is in focus before it falls away. A shallow depth of field, which is nice and shallow, means our background gets nice and blurry and nice and smooth, and some people like that. We can see the impact of it here on a red-capped plover. the second bird is out of focus because of our shallow depth of field. And it also helps us to minimize distracting elements in our background. You can see in this image of a stunning flame robin, that shallow depth of field has completely blurred that background. It still has some nice color there, but it's not distracting. And that's kind of the images that I like and the images that I take. However, sometimes I like to take images that have more habitat in the background. I know a lot of you actually prefer more habitat, therefore we probably need a bigger depth of field to include that habitat. For example, here's a shot of a Jackie Winter, and we can see that those plants and habitat are not completely out of focus. It gives it some context and we can sort of sense where that bird is in its environment. Now, what I like is having the ability to have both a shallow depth of field and a bigger depth of field. How do we achieve that? Now, there's a few key things that change our depth of field. The biggest one is how close we are to the subject in relation to our focal length. The closer we are, the shallower that depth of field. Now, our focal length also impacts how compressed our scene is. It actually pulls the background towards us, which makes everything bigger and makes it look like it's gone out of focus. And the third thing is our aperture. So our aperture controls how much light is coming in. The lower our aperture number, or our max aperture, the more shallow our depth of field is. So lower the number, the shallower the depth of field. So let's say f4, like my big 500 f4, that's going to have a very shallow depth of field. However, my 500 7.1, that's going to have a bigger depth of field. And then if we went up to f11, f12, even bigger depth of field. So as that number gets higher, our depth of field gets bigger. Ideally, what we want with wildlife is a low max aperture to give us the ability to have both shallow and wide depth of field. Now, this is very confusing and I'm going to try to explain it the easiest I can so that you can understand it. So let's say I've got the Sony A7 Mark IV, which is a full frame camera, and we've got the 200 to 600 lens. So I've got a 600mm lens with an aperture of 6.3. Now, if I take a photo of Gary the Galah at 600 6.3, this is what the image looks like. And you can see that that background is out of focus, it's blurred, it looks quite nice because our depth of field is quite shallow. Now, if I was to use the 300mm f4 on the Olympus body, so just imagine this was a 300mm lens on the OM-1, our field of view is now 600mm. It's going to be the identical field of view as the Sony. So this is 600, the Sony 600mm field of view, the Olympus is 600mm field of view. Now, if I set the aperture to 6.3 on this lens, look at the resulting image. Look at them side by side. Can you see the difference in the depth of field? The Olympus is just nowhere near as out of focus and it's nowhere near as blurry. Even though the bird's the same size, our field of view is 600, the background isn't. So why is that? What's going on? Well, there's a difference in focal length. The focal length is only 300mm, whereas this focal length is 600mm. So remember, effectively all we're doing is taking a photo with a 300mm lens and cropping it in 2 times. So it gives us a background that's nowhere near as shallow. And I can highlight this by simply grabbing the Sony kit and setting this to 300mm 6.3. So now we have the same focal length as the Olympus. And if I take a photo, surprise, surprise, we get the same depth of field. And now if I just do a 2 times crop on the Sony body, we're now effectively looking at what the Olympus looks like. I know that's a little bit confusing, and for my mind, the easiest way for me to understand this concept is I just multiply the aperture by the crop factor to give me what the depth of field equivalent is. So for this lens here, we've got 400mm 6.3. Gives me a field of view of 800, but my depth of field is the equivalent of f13. So it's 6.3 times 2 is f13. So my depth of field is going to look like an 800mm f13 lens on a full frame. And I can easily show this. Another example is I grab the 800 f11. So we've got 800mm, apertures f11. I put this on the R6 and we took a photo. And here's Gary the Galah, nice background, it's sort of out of focus. Now if I take the same shot with the Olympus at 400mm, they're very similar in their backgrounds because this one, remember, is going to give me the equivalent of 800 f13. So simply just multiply your aperture by 2 to give you an equivalent depth of field. Now that is going to have some serious consequences, and it definitely did for me in the field. Like f13, it was nowhere near as shallow as 6.3 or f4, and what you're just going to struggle to get those out of focus backgrounds, and I definitely did. And I went for a wander through the bush with this kit, and I had a diamond firetail beautiful little finch, and I've tried to get low and I've taken some shots, but I just simply couldn't get that subject isolation. The background was a bit messy, and that's because we've got a depth of field equivalent of f13. If I'd been using, say, the Nikon 800 6.3 lens, it would give us a completely different image. The background would be quite isolated. It would just look much, much better. So we also need to apply the same thing to our APS-C bodies. So let's say we had a 1.5 crop factor, we had a 400mm lens at 5.6. 5.6 times 1. So our background's going to look like an f8 lens. And it's just something you need to be aware of. It's not as big of an issue on APS-C as it is on micro four thirds. Like f13 is a lot different to f8. Now I did use the 300 f4 by Olympus. That now is a 600 and it gives us a depth of field of f8, which is manageable, and I much prefer the 300 f4 because it's just much shallower depth of field. And I captured this red knee dotterel, and you can see that we do get a fair bit of background blur going on here, which is just nice. So there's always a flip side. I know a lot of people prefer to have more habitat in their background, and this lens will give you that. And I actually took a shot of a superb fairy wren in my front yard, and it was on this rock, and I actually like how this image looks because we can see the grass in the background. It's just out of focus enough that we can see it. If I had a shallower depth of field, it probably would have just blurred it all out. So again, it just depends on your preference and what you like. If you like that background to have more habitat in it, then this will be perfect for you. And of course, with a bit of skill, you can even use one of these lenses and get an out of focus background, because again, it just has to do with isolating your subject and how far away it is. So as I was walking through the bush, I did spot a yellow-footed antechinus, and it was on a tree trunk, and I've managed to get myself into position where the background was far away. And as you can see, we've isolated that subject perfectly. I love those ears. I love that inquisitive pose, and that was captured with a depth of field of equivalent of f13. So it's definitely possible. It's just a little bit harder at times if you have a background close to your subject. All right, that leads us to the second issue with crop bodies, and most of you will be familiar with this, and it's low light performance. It's how much noise you get in your images, and it definitely impacts your image quality. And it's understandable because we're cropping a full frame image down. If we were to crop the R5 image, you're going to see more noise. So it all makes sense. Now, thankfully, a very helpful person at Photons at Photos has created a chart which compares all these cameras and their ISO performance in relation to the dynamic range. And the worst performing on this chart was the Canon R10, the R7 at 2213 ISO, and then the Olympus OM-1 at 2412. So interestingly, the Olympus, even though it's actually a smaller sensor, performs better than the R7. So credit to the Olympus there. But then you can see as we get to the full frame bodies, its performance almost doubles. We almost get another stop of light at least. The R6 Mark II is 5575, which just goes to show, and obviously the Canon R3 is out in front there in terms of its low light performance. All that means is in the field, you're going to be able to shoot higher ISO on the full frame, and you have to use noise reduction when you start using higher ISOs. And I've experienced that on the OM-1, probably anything over 1600, I was definitely using noise reduction, maybe even lower, and the R7 is roughly the same. Now, just for reference, I did take a couple of shots with the R6 Mark II and the OM-1 just to show you the noise difference. We'll start at ISO of 3200. And I actually took a shot of my new model. It's Colin the Cockatiel. My wife made that, which is pretty cute. And as we can see, there's a clear difference in the noise. The OM-1 just has a lot more noise, which is to be expected. And then we have the R6. Now I've jumped up to an ISO of 25,600. And again, you can see the full frame just outcompetes the OM-1. Now something that's extremely important to understand is as soon as we start cropping our full frame image, its performance is going to drop. We're going to see more apparent noise in the image. So that R6 Mark II, if I had to crop it heavily, it's actually going to end up probably with equivalent or more noise than the OM-1. The benefit is when we can actually fill the frame with the subject. That's when our full frame is going to outperform our crops by quite a bit. And I decided to actually show you an example shot at 25,600 on the OM-1. Went for a walk, the sun hadn't come up yet, had a kookaburra singing in a tree. I've taken some shots, and as you can see, the noise is pretty excessive at 25,600. We just didn't have the light, and as a result, there's too much noise, and I would have usually just thrown that image away. However, we're so lucky now to have software, noise reduction software, DxO Pure Raw and Topaz Denoise. I highly encourage you to download the trials. I've got links in the description below. They do support the channel. I'm very grateful of that. But I used DxO Pure Raw 3 on that kookaburra image, and look at them side by side. It's hard to believe that it's the same image. That software often works just magic, and I honestly can't believe it sometimes. It's that good. It doesn't always work perfectly, but a lot of the time it's going to help you save those noisy images, and it definitely did there. The other area that these cameras will often struggle is your shadow recovery, or the noise in the shadows. It's just the performance isn't quite the same. We often don't get the same dynamic range. And I was actually in the field with my mate, and we had some yellowtail black cockatoos flying past. Now, it was my fault, but I got the exposure wrong because I was photographing some birds in the dark, and then I had to transfer up into the sky, and I actually underexposed it because the sky's quite bright. The bird was black, it's very dark, and I just stuffed it up. And I was shooting at ISO 1600, so I was hopeful that I'd be able to recover some of the details in post. But when I increased the shadows in Lightroom, the image just simply falls apart. There's no detail there whatsoever, extremely noisy, and I was disappointed. And I did try Topaz denoise, and it worked okay. Like if we don't zoom in, you can kind of see that it's the yellowtail black cockatoo. It's not too bad, but when we zoom in, it gets that painterly weird look that noise reduction often does. So slightly disappointing in that regard. So ultimately, in low light, just don't expect the crop bodies to perform anywhere near as well as the full frame options. It's just something we need to be aware of. Something else I guess we need to mention is that this body is only 20 megapixels. So you're already starting at a 2x crop. And when you start cropping this even more, your image quality is going to go down. Whereas we've got 45 megapixels, we can crop a little bit. This is all based on if you can get close to your subject, of course. But I'd prefer a higher megapixel body and work on getting close to the subject so that then I can get the best, biggest possible image that I can get. Now I want to reiterate that there are advantages and disadvantages to all these, and which one is right for you is completely dependent on your budget. That's probably the biggest one, is your budget, how you photograph. Do you just walk around and you want something light and easy and you want the subject big? Or do you use massive lenses and you sit in hides and you can sit all day, tripod, and you've got the funds to afford, say, a Z9 and their latest 600mm lens? I looked that up on B&H, and that currently costs around $21,000 US for that Nikon kit. In Australia, $36,500 for that Nikon kit, which is just insane, but that will give you the best possible image quality if that's what you're after. However, if we look at this Olympus kit, let's say the Olympus OM-1, I think this body retails for about $2,200 in the US, which I mentioned earlier. And it has almost the same features as the Z9, it's just that the sensor's smaller. If we were to pick up the 300 f4, which is the better lens, that combo is going to set you back just over 5,000 US and about, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 Australian dollars. So it's a quarter of the price. So for a quarter of the price, you can get almost the same performance, the same field of view of 600mm if you're not using the teleconverter. It makes this a very attractive package. And you could of course step down to the R7 and maybe the RF 100 to 400, probably just over $2,000 US for a really nice kit that's going to give you 640 field of view. And then finally, of course, there's loads of really good secondhand DSLRs on the market. In fact, I still love my DSLRs and I still use them and I still capture really nice images. And just for an example, I'm going to show you two images. I'm going to show you one captured on the Nikon Z9 and the 500 5.6 PF and the converter. I think it's around 10,000 US dollars, so quite expensive. Compare that to the original Canon 7D and this 400 5.6. So let's say that's around 800 US, so 10,000 versus $800. Here's the first image of an eastern bristlebird. Beautiful, stunning light, great pose. Just love this image. It's probably my favorite eastern bristlebird image I've captured. The next image, we can see that it's slightly overcast. It probably doesn't quite have the same detail. It's just nowhere near as good of an image. And of interest, the good image and the good light was actually captured with the budget affordable kit. I captured it 10 years ago, and the other one I captured only a few weeks ago. What that highlights is how important the weather, the light, and the conditions, how close you are, compares to how expensive the kit is. Just because that kit is worth 10,000 doesn't mean your images are going to instantly be amazing, because the weather plays such a big part. That would have been switched. If I'd had nice weather with the Nikon kit, the images of course would have been much, much better. It's often in the low light and the poor performance where that expensive kit excels. But the difference between budget kit and a really expensive, in terms of image quality, in good light at least, it's hard to tell the difference. So we have, as consumers, need to make that decision. Do I spend the extra money to enable me to take those photos in low light, etc.? So just food for thought. All right, so that sort of highlights the pros and cons Which one's right for you? Only you can answer that. But to be honest, I'm just stoked that we have these options available to us. I don't like the competition of people bad-mouthing one over the other, saying crop's no good, you've got to go full frame. Just bollocks. Just go with whatever suits you. The fact we have them is of a great benefit. Like loads of people use the OM-1 and just absolutely love it. Lots of people use the R7 and love it. And of course, lots of people use full frame and love it. So I'm not here to judge which one is the best. It depends on you. Me personally, I'm probably going to go with the full frame and the larger lenses. A, because I can afford it. I'm very grateful and fortunate that I can. But I'd rather start at the high point if I can get close to the subject to get that detail. However, at times I will still grab the crop body if it's a weight issue, if I'm just walking around, maybe bird and flight because the Olympus is so good at that. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Obviously give it that thumbs up if you did. Thanks to all the members that have joined the channel. If you're not aware, for less than the price of a cup of coffee per month, you can become a member. You get a cool little emoji next to your name and you can download the 2023 digital calendar. Features a number of really high quality images that you can get for free. To those that have recently joined, thank you. To the existing ones, thank you. Thanks to the subscribers. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you in the next one.